There are exactly two technologies in the totality and history of cryptocurrencies since Bitcoin's origination 17 years ago that have done this successfully at scale. Bitcoin and Bittensor, absolutely nothing else.
The only other comparison I can think of is when you look back in the early 90s, AOL was worth a few $100 million, and that was centralized public networking. And meanwhile, there was quietly this unknown protocol, TCP/IP, the internet, decentralized networking, which was about to be huge, which has now contributed tens of trillions of dollars of value to the planet.
We cannot have a tiny group of corporations dictating how we use technology. And that is very much how the world is going right now.
10th episode. JJ, when we first started doing this, it was just you and me. We were having a chat, of course, as we do, about Tao, and it was getting deeper and deeper philosophically, technically, financially. And we said, let's just hit the record button and start doing a podcast. And now here we are on the 10th episode. I feel people are learning a lot about Bittensor through us. I'm learning a lot about Bittensor through these podcasts. How's it going?
It's going great. Happy Halloween, James.
Happy Halloween.
I pulled out my special psychedelic mushrooms shirt for this episode.
Excellent. So you're dressed up as yourself, basically.
Not much has changed.
So JJ, also happy Tao hitting a year-to-date high day. Like Tao, here we are in almost November, and Tao today hits a year-to-date high. And what's very interesting about Tao hitting a year-to-date high today is that everything else is down. So I feel out of the, typically the top 100 cryptos are very correlated to either Bitcoin or Ethereum or both. And I feel like in the past, since the flash crash from 3 weeks ago, I feel like Tao has, in a sense, decoupled from Ethereum for the first time since I've been following it, really. And I have the reasons I suspect why it's doing that. I'm curious what your reasons are, and then I'll share my reasons.
Well, I definitely agree with you. I'm just sharing my screen. I don't know if you can see, but we're on trusty old CoinMarketCap here. And yeah, Bittensor pretty much blew through top 30, I want to say a couple days ago. It's been very strong, as you mentioned, for the last few weeks. Generally, I think there's a lot of bearish sentiment around Bitcoin vis-a-vis other assets, which is kind of weird looking at people I follow, which isn't necessarily crypto Twitter, but just business people or more sort of like less price action, crazy degen types, but like proper analysts kind of saying like coin's been sort of flat to medium performing this year. I think it's up moderately or might even be down or flat for the year. Meanwhile, NVIDIA is up 50, 60%, whatever, and like a bunch of other things. But to your point, I think if you look at the top, and I don't normally like doing this kind of thing, like commenting on prices and stuff. There's much more interesting stuff to talk about, obviously, but
yes. But the decoupling is interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, if you look at the top, let's say the top 30 assets here, like this is the top 30 cryptocurrencies. What's really interesting, and I put an analysis together a couple months ago. I think we've talked about it a couple times on the podcast, kind of just like taking out the wrapped, staked cryptocurrencies. So things like, USDE or Leo, and also taking out meme coins like, Shiba Inu, Doge, and so on. So if you take those out, we're really kind of in the top 20 for Bittensor. And then you really have to sort of like assess the categories. Pretty much everything is DeFi. Like there really aren't other categories.
Right.
Stablecoins and Ethereum competitors, essentially. So people are networks that want to be like Ethereum or essentially Tether competitors. And then it's really like, frankly, it's kind of interesting. It's like two other assets in the top 20, Coin and Bittensor, right? And so if you think from first principles clearly about like where the world is going, we're clearly experiencing massive move into Bitcoin over the last decade due to monetary policy changes, aggressively printing more fiat currencies. And this is really like a global phenomenon, but in particular with the US dollar in response to COVID. And so, Bitcoin appreciated, I think 200 times or sorry, I think it's actually 400 times in the last decade, in the last 10 years. And then, obviously, Bittensor is way down here, but like the biggest movement that we've seen in terms of investment capital and markets is AI. And people want better AI models. They want cheaper inference. They want better training data. They want better algorithms. It's pretty obvious. I think the world is investing probably around $500 billion per year in AI. And if you look at a permissionless, decentralized, deflationary, like Bitcoin, asset that can essentially continuously deliver the same results for humanity and leverage all of humanity, and you kind of like ask the question, it's been running in production for 4 years. It's delivered dozens of proven networks that actually have delivered real value. It's probably around 5 or 6 of those are actually state of the art, right? And then you sort of go and say it's worth $5 billion. It's kind of crazy. Like it should be worth 50 or maybe 100 billion or more. And so I think there's going to be a big repricing.
I agree. We're looking at the picks and shovels of AI is clearly NVIDIA. So NVIDIA makes the chips that power all of the data centers that make these large LLMs. And NVIDIA is worth $5 trillion. And it's worth it. NVIDIA has proven that it should be worth, if not 5 trillion, in the trillions. Maybe 5 trillion is optimistic, but not overly optimistic. Meanwhile, Bittensor, which is the leader in decentralized AI, let's not call it a cryptocurrency. I almost hate comparing it. Like you said, all the other top 30 coins are like decentralized finance tokens or Ethereums or whatever, not counting Bitcoin. And so I don't even like calling Bittensor crypto. It's the leading platform for decentralized AI, for the picks and shovels of decentralized AI, just like NVIDIA is the leading company for centralized AI and the picks and shovels of centralized AI. And Bittensor in total is worth $4 billion compared to 5 trillion. The only other comparison I can think of is when you look back in the early 90s, AOL was worth a few hundred million, and that was centralized public networking. And meanwhile, there was quietly this unknown protocol, TCP/IP, the internet, about to be, decentralized networking, which was about to be huge, which has now contributed tens of trillions of dollars of value to the planet, and maybe higher, maybe the entire economic industry of the planet, which is in the quadrillions, is built on top of the internet right now. And Bittensor, this goes to, a lot of people use the word permissionless when it comes to crypto and Bitcoin and even Bittensor. And I never really understood what that meant, but I do understand now what it means. So when you look at Bitcoin, let's just take President Trump as an example. Why did he get excited about Bitcoin for his second term, but not so much his first term? Well, in 2021, when he was not president anymore, guess what? All the banks said to him, President Trump, nice to know you. You can't have a bank account here anymore. So Bank of America, which was his bank, debanked him. And we know Trump gets angry. And also Trump wanted to find a solution. By the way, this is not political. I'm not saying go out and vote for Trump or not Trump or whatever. This is exactly what happened. He got debanked like 20 million other households in America can't get permission to get bank accounts. And he realized, and his children realized, hey, this crypto thing is the only way we can actually store our money, get yield on our money, lend out our money, and do all sorts of the other great functions that money is supposed to provide. Well, guess what? It turns out you need permission to get a bank account. So Satoshi Nakamoto, and this is like a little history lesson with Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto said, hey, we need to create a currency where you don't need permission to hold your money and to do things with your money. So that's where the whole idea of Bitcoin miners come from. Well, when you make a transaction, you don't need a bank in the middle validating your transaction anymore. Now these miners validate your transaction. And so that's the permissionless. Well, the same thing happens with Tao, is that, hey, right now, if I want to start a big AI company, well, guess what? I need permission from VCs to get money. I need permission from NVIDIA to buy their chips, by the way. There's a waiting list for NVIDIA chips. You can't just go to the store and buy an NVIDIA chip. You will never, if you're not OpenAI or XAI or Google or Facebook, you're not getting an NVIDIA chip right now. Like it's sold out. And so you need permission to get the technology to build AI. You need permission to get employees because you got to hire people. They've got to choose you. You've got to choose them, and you're limited to whoever you can find as an employee. So you need permission to get employees who want to work on your AI. And it's basically impossible to start right now a competitor to many AI companies because you need permission all over the place. Well, Tao solves that problem. Bittensor/Tao solves that problem. The VC funding is built into the incentive mechanisms. It's built into the tokens. Just the way miners got rewarded in Bitcoin, people who work on AI models or software models get rewarded in Tao tokens. Oh, I don't need permission to be a company. I can register as a subnet. I don't need the permission from my state and the VCs and the lawyers and so on. Oh, I don't need permission. I don't need to hire whatever employees and spend six figures. The best people around the world will become miner. If I have the right incentive mechanism and a good idea, the best AI developers in the world will find me and mine the subnet tokens and the Tao tokens they're denominated in on my subnet. So this whole permissionless thing is so important for entrepreneurship. Just like writing a book, you no longer need permission from a publisher and an agent and a marketing department and an editor to publish a book. You can write your book and upload it to Amazon. So book publishing has become, in a sense, decentralized thanks to a centralized company called Amazon. But Bittensor takes it one step further. There's no central authority. There's no government. There's no company in the middle. We all have the power to create multi-billion-dollar companies. Tensor, Ridges being a great example. I always talk about it. But look, let's talk about BitMind. BitMind does deepfake detection. I have on my phone right now the app, AI or not. I can put in a photo or a video. Is this AI or not? 99% it's AI. 99% it's not AI. That's done by BitMind, which is a Bittensor subnet. And by the way, I think the reason Bittensor is getting decoupled from all of these DeFi tokens and Ethereum and so on is because now, finally, people are looking at the subnets and saying, hey, I want to own one of these subnets. These subnets, here's a subnet that's valued at $100 million competing with the subnet with a centralized AI company that's worth $30 billion. And by the way, their software is even better. I want to own some of this. Now, to own a subnet token, you have to first buy Tao tokens. Anytime anyone buys a single subnet token, it creates buying pressure on Tao. And people have finally realized that, yes, Tao is amazing and it's great as a network, but that's because the subnets are amazing and I want to buy subnets now.
Yeah, I think just to kind of elaborate a bit on my take on permissionlessness, which you talked about a bit there, I think it is really not well understood how important permissionlessness is for innovation and for human freedom and prosperity. So if you look at the way startups, companies, and sort of conventional quote unquote free market capitalism, the reason I put the quotes there is it's only free to the extent that the government provides conditions for the freedoms that we have, right? So for example, NVIDIA is blocked from selling into China, which is really upsetting Jensen, right? So he's publicly sharing the numbers. This is a $50 billion hit to their revenue on an annual basis. And over the next decade, it could be hundreds of billions in revenue that they're losing out on. So he said, as of now, we went from 90% market share in China to zero. Obviously, this is really frustrating and it's hurting the potential of our company. It's also hurting the potential of diffusing AI, right? This diffusion kind of concept, this narrative that we're hearing about AI diffusion is a global thing. It's a borderless thing. But to make something really borderless, we need policy changes that actually allow for permissionless innovation. And if you have governments sanctioning on exports of truly innovative technology, and by the way, all technology is dual use. You can take a pen and go and kill someone, right? It's the decision that you make to go and commit a harmful act that should be punished, not the object that you used to commit the crime, right? And so all technology is dual use. You can apply this to AI. You can apply this to open source code. Terrorists use open source to go and do horrible things all the time. But without the framework of permissionlessness, without the unlimited confidence in the goodness of humanity and the positivity of humanity to outweigh the negative, harmful actors like terrorists and people that want to commit crimes, open source and permissionlessness would not work. You cannot have discrimination in rights. This is why, the founding fathers in America, who were, by the way, just like a bunch of super young guys that were full of energy and brilliance, Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, and the people that invented Western democracy, said, we are building a framework for unalienable human rights for freedom across many dimensions, for freedom to protect yourself, for freedom to express yourself, for freedom to behave however you want, obviously within the framework of progressing society and making things better for other people. And so what Bittensor does is it provides this kind of mechanistic guarantee, and it does it at a protocol level, very similar to how Bitcoin does this for money, beyond permissionlessness, right, which is extremely important to protect at a mechanistic level, right? So like, instead of saying, maybe I wake up one day and there's a government policy change that makes things not so permissionless, right? It's like, I need to start getting permission for certain things. That's not permissionlessness, right? What Bitcoin proved is that you have the ability to permissionlessly and in a censorship-free manner, which is actually kind of a different concept, possess the right to freely trade goods and services and store your wealth and store your earnings and income in a way that can't be taken from you. And what Bittensor does is it does that in the context of continuously improving AI, or frankly, continuously improving technology. And we're going to stop talking about AI probably in the next 10, 20 years. In the same way, I think this was Satya talking about this during an interview recently from Microsoft, or may have been Alfred Lin from Sequoia. I think I was listening to a podcast he did recently. And I've been saying this for a while too. It's kind of obvious. It's just like an obvious thing. We're going to stop saying AI. We're going to stop using the AI label. It's just going to be technology. And so the fundamental thing is, if you go back to the internet, you're talking about AOL days, people were massively confused about the implications of these huge breakthroughs. You start giving things labels like it's an internet company or it's a .com company or whatever. No, it's just the unstoppable wave of technology progress. What we're seeing in AI right now is an unstoppable wave of technology progress. People need permissionless, censorship-free ways to adopt and improve the technology. And Bittensor is doing that in the context of AI today, but over time it does it in the context of everything. Bitcoin does this for money, censorship-free, permissionless money. Bittensor does this for technology, for AI, for sure, but it's expanding beyond that, permissionless, censorship-free. I'll give you a concrete example of this, because you talked about NVIDIA, and we're talking about sanctions, and now Jensen can't sell to China. This is very frustrating, right? He's like one of the greatest entrepreneurs in the history of capitalism, and there's a government, which, by the way, he's operating within because he built an American company that's saying you can't sell to, by the way, the second largest buyer of technology on the planet, which is China, right? So your second largest customer, essentially. And that's really frustrating for Jensen, but he marches on. And that shows how great and resilient he is as a leader. But we shouldn't have to deal with those arbitrary decisions because technology benefits all of humanity. I'm very against this notion of China hawks because it basically says we're discriminating against an entire ethnic group, which, by the way, represents almost 20% of humans on the planet. So there's 17% of all living humans that reside in China. 17%. So just like take away the label of China. By the way, all the top AI research comes from China. As we know, most of the innovation in robotics and manufacturing and energy, the vast majority of the world's nuclear engineers are in China. And so we're trying to accelerate nuclear. They're largely all in China. And so you can't discriminate on a political framework and an ethnic group at the same time. You can kind of like separate the political framework from the ethnic group, but like the degree of innovation and economic activity in China is very difficult to decouple. So obviously there's a huge amount of Bitcoin activity in China. Without China's adoption of Bitcoin, maybe the network wouldn't be possible because, by the way, the computers that all the Bitcoin miners use are manufactured by Chinese. It's manufactured by a company called Bitmain, and they make these chips called Antminers. And I think that represents something like 90% of all the Bitcoin miner chips that are actually running the SHA-256 mining work. But I want to say one last thing about censorship resistance. The United States arbitrarily wakes up and says, look, because of these trade issues, we're going to sanction and block our number one American corporation, our example of leading Western free market capitalist excellence. We're going to block them from selling to their second largest customer. That is not permissionless free market capitalism. That is censored free market capitalism. And what Bittensor says is there's going to be a plethora in the same way that we have on Bitcoin's network for unstoppable, permissionless, decentralized money and store of wealth. On the Bittensor network, there's going to be many subnets that provide disaggregated GPU compute resources, and there will be no company or no country that will be able to sanction the consumption, the use, and the trade of those resources. Because these networks ultimately, over time, can build the resilience and the structures to be fully permissionless and fully censorship resistant in the same way that Bitcoin is. And we basically need these options in a world of uncertainty, in a world of extreme political polarization. We need these options. And there's so much to talk about, James. So much has happened. I'll say one last thing. Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, announced a few days ago an effort to build a permissionless, decentralized inference network, which is AI inference, on the Ton network, which is a extremely heavily VC-funded cryptocurrency that is endorsed and kind of co-operated by Telegram. Now, there's two things to understand here. Telegram is an amazing company. It is run and fully owned by Pavel Durov, 100%. He owns 100% of the company. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Congratulations. That guy is an incredible entrepreneur and builder. He's built a company super capital efficiently. They have like 100 people and they serve 1 billion users. Very profitable as well, 2 billion in revenue. Telegram. I use Telegram every day. Telegram's awesome. Fully end-to-end encrypted. By the way, all of their client-side software is fully open source. Some of their server-side stuff is not, for privacy reasons and for infrastructure security reasons on their side, but like almost all their stuff is actually open source and reproducible, which is extremely impressive. Actually, even more so than Signal, something I learned recently. But the Telegram open network, or the open network, this Ton thing, is heavily VC funded. And Pavel announced that he's basically been saying the same exact things that we've been talking about on this show regarding permissionless, decentralized AI, inference in particular, right? Running the models. We've been talking about this for many months. We've both been evangelizing Bittensor for years. Pavel is using his own language and his own sort of philosophical framework. The thing that I really strongly agree with, and I hope that his effort is successful, but I really don't see how it could create the right incentive framework, because the Ton cryptocurrency is like 20 or 30% of it is owned by insiders and the VCs, right? But he said we have to stand for freedom. We have to stand for permissionless, censorship-free ways of expressing ourselves and using technology. We cannot have a tiny group of corporations dictating how we use technology. And that is very much how the world is going right now.
Yeah, and also you look at, there's a lot of financial shenanigans happening among the top AI companies where, company A invests in company B has to buy chips from company C then invests in company A, which invests in company B. Like, it's this circle jerk of AI. But, and again, we obviously have seen Bittensor avoid a lot of that. But I agree, like, as usual, JJ, you make me think about the whole China-US thing. Like, obviously, a lot's been going on with the so-called trade war between China and the US. And on the one hand, you could say, listen, China's already crushing the US in the AI war and the nuclear war. Why should we give them the chips to make it even easier for them? And maybe they're going to do damage to us with that AI. But the flip side is every single industry in the US depends on rare earth minerals. And the number one source by far in the world for rare earth minerals right now is China. And China is starting to say the same thing we're saying to China. Hey, we're not going to sell you the rare earth minerals anymore unless you show us, you're using them for pencil sharpeners and not for weapons. And, the more and more we start questioning each other instead of sharing with each other, I think that's when a trade discussion becomes a trade war. There's a saying, two countries can either exchange bullets or money. So I'll change that to two countries can either exchange bullets or ideas. And the less we're sharing ideas with other companies, the more we're going to be sharing bullets, whether those are financial bullets or real bullets or whatever. It doesn't even matter. So I agree with you. Things should be, we shouldn't be.
We want to stay
decisions.
away from real bullets. We really want to stay away from real.
But even financial bullets, which can cause poverty and mass despair and so on. And by the way, the only people truly affected by permissioned economies and governments are the poor and impoverished. Like, look at the mundane professions. Like, let's say you wanted to be a manicurist and you're living in the state of Idaho. You want to be a manicurist in the state of Idaho. Guess what? Even though you've been doing it all your life, maybe you've been doing your mom's nails, your sister's nails, your friend's nails. Guess what? You need permission now if you're going to do it professionally. You have to take a test. You have to pay an annual fee. You have to take renewed education courses. It's ridiculous. You could basically go broke getting permission to be an entrant in the lower paying jobs and careers. Elon Musk didn't need permission to be a rocket scientist. He just did it. And of course, yes, he needs permission for airspace and all that kind of stuff. But to actually say, I'm going to go build a rocket, he just went out and did it. But a manicurist had to take a test about nails. And I asked the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, this once, like, why, stop doing that. Stop taking away the rights of the poor people by basically requiring them to take these tests. And he's like, well, look, there's chemicals involved. You have to know what you're doing. And I was like, trust me, if somebody is like spreading dangerous chemicals around, their customers are going to know it pretty quickly and stop using them. Like, it's the free market. It's not that regulation stops bad behavior or corruption or incompetence. It just makes it illegal. But the free markets also stop these things almost as quickly or even more quickly, because sometimes we trust regulations too much. We say, well, they're regulated, so it must be okay. And we trust them. This is why probably a third of the companies on the stock market are corrupt in one way or the other, because, it's public on the New York Stock Exchange. It must be okay. In fact, they're run by criminals. So this concept of permissionless is not just about technology. It's really at a deep level how the philosophy of running a country or a state or whatever is formed. And if someone said, hey, I want to give you a homework assignment, with code, with programming, write a code which simulates a free market and the free market economy, I can't think of a better example than Bittensor and Tao. And because I think this is so woven into the fabric, the philosophy of a free market is so woven into the fabric of Bittensor, this is why it's standing out now among the top 100. Like, since the flash crash, it's been the top performing token in the top 100. This is why we're invested in it. And it shows me, at least, it gives me some confidence in my investing decisions when you invest based on a philosophical approach, and that philosophical approach turns out to be correct.
Yeah, Bittensor is the only cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin to incentivize real world utility at scale. There are no others.
Well,
right?
let me be devil's advocate though. Like, okay, Ethereum has real world utility and it can scale. And by the way, I'm bullish on Ethereum, just not as bullish as I am on Bittensor.
I'm sorry, I should have qualified. And I think that's true. If you want to say financial utility, right? So smart contracts or stablecoins. By the way, all the stablecoins are based on Solidity smart contracts, which are running on the EVM, which is Ethereum technology. So Tether has Solidity contracts, by the way, which are proprietary. They're not open source. And so this is an interesting thing. A lot of people don't realize, like, Tether is actually very proprietary. Their smart contracts are audited, but they're not open source. But to your point, yes, correct. Financial utility exists. What I meant to say was non-financial, real-world utility being incentivized using cryptocurrency has not been proven outside of Bitcoin and Bittensor. And by the way, the reason I say Bitcoin is a non-financial example of real-world incentivized cryptocurrencies, permissionless decentralized cryptocurrencies, is Bitcoin is using a cryptographic hash function. Now let's really ask ourselves from first principles, what does a cryptographic hash function have to do with money? Almost nothing. It's a computation. It's a type of computation. You're using bitwise. If people want to get really technical and fact check me, you're not using floating point math. You're using bitwise math to compute a cryptographic hash function. That has absolutely nothing to do with money. What Satoshi Nakamoto, by the way, the other really awesome thing about our episode today is it's the 17th anniversary of the Bitcoin white paper. Today.
You're kidding.
Wow, that's really cool, right?
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's today. So a lot of tweets about it and stuff. I was tweeting about my favorite section from the Bitcoin white paper, which was released 17 years ago today, which is page 4, section 6, which is the incentive section, and wherein Satoshi articulates the incentive mechanism for Bitcoin, right? And by the way, the first version of the Bitcoin network did not require GPUs or ASICs or custom, specialized chips. You could mine Bitcoin using CPUs, right? Which is actually what people did for the first year in Bitcoin's existence from January 2009. Most people were mining Bitcoin using their CPUs, using like Linux boxes or their laptops or workstations. Yeah. Going back to non-financial utility, real world utility that has been permissionlessly incentivized. There are exactly 2 technologies in the totality and history of cryptocurrencies since Bitcoin's origination 17 years ago that have done this successfully at scale. Bitcoin and Bittensor, absolutely nothing else. Almost all of the networks on Bittensor are permissionlessly incentivizing non-financial real-world utility, inference, 3D models, data generation, prediction markets, GPU aggregation, training networks, pre-training networks, post-training networks, graph neural networks, oracles. There's a long list of things on Bittensor that have nothing to do with financial markets in terms of their impact and real-world utility. And I think it's being intellectually disingenuous. One thing I hear from a lot of people is like, look, everything is getting financialized. Everything is financial. Well, actually, that's not true. Finance and money are just languages of value representation. What matters is creating technology that actually elevates people's lives and makes things more abundant and more productive. Is Google search a financial product? No. Were they the highest money printing company for a long time until, frankly, Amazon kind of showed up? By the way, I was doing a research effort the other day using AI, kind of looking at share issuance and stock buyback differentials. I was just curious about it. I was like, gosh, pretty sure if I had to do this by hand, it's going to take me like 3 weeks to do. I got it done in about an hour with the help of AI. And the question was, stack rank the Mag 7. Let's just look at the Mag 7. Compute the total profits that they've generated over the last decade, so 2015 to 2025. And then also look at two other metrics. Share issuance. How many shares did they print in order to do stock compensation or acquisitions, which is mostly what you do to create the reasons you create shares as a public company. And then the last metric was how many buybacks did they execute, meaning the other way around. How much did they shrink the size of their share count in buying back shares? And Amazon ranked the highest. They printed 1.5. Actually, well, I just said it. I was going to ask you to guess. It's such a gargantuan number. People don't actually have appreciation for this. It's like twice or 3 times NVIDIA. Amazon printed 1.5 trillion in profits in the last decade.
Wow.
That's 150 billion in profits per year. Profits. And they shrank the outstanding share count of Amazon stock by, I want to say 30 or 40%, right? And so instead of share issuance, they had share contraction, which is like massive bravo, right? Like huge congratulations to Amazon for doing this. What we tend to correlate with buyback levels at that extreme extent is a slowing rate of innovation. I don't know. I think Amazon's actually been a pretty innovative company. I think they've done a lot of really great things in terms of reorganizing Amazon Web Services, promoting Andy Jassy, who built AWS from scratch to be CEO when Jeff kind of moved into the chairman role. Like Amazon's actually been pretty innovative. But what I wanted to say was like at this level of profits, right? Like you have a company that has demonstrated they can both shrink the share count and invest in innovation. I think what it also shows, though, is it's a non-financial result. They have massively streamlined distribution and logistics for consumers purchasing goods and services in the economy, right? Like basically commerce and participating in buying goods and services. Amazon has massively transformed that function for humans at a global level. And this is a non-financial thing. Right? When we're talking about buying a product, yes, you're using money to buy the product. But when you want the product delivered to you, someone's got to get it in the box, package the box, put the box in some transportation device, drive it to you. Right? These are all technologies that humans had to invent to get that thing delivered to you. And that's what I mean by Bittensor incentivizing non-financial utility and technology is it allows for that to happen in a way that is completely disruptive to conventional capitalism. And part of the thesis I've been really trying to develop more, and I've been blogging a little bit about this, and I think the podcast as well for me is like a way of getting some of these ideas more refined and then created to be distilled in like a blog or a thesis that's better articulated is, I think that we're seeing two really big, very long-term kind of negative trends play out. One is the debasement of fiat currencies, which is driven by a tiny group of people in every country that arbitrarily decide whether to expand or contract the monetary supply. And we've pretty much only been going in one direction, which is expansion, right, for the last several decades. And this is not just us, this is also China. By the way, China's printed twice as much of their currency, the renminbi, the RMB, as the United States has with the dollar. China, dollar denominated, has printed about 40 trillion of the RMB in the last 20 years. 40 trillion. Right? The United States did about 25 trillion in the last decade, almost all due to COVID and stimulus response. But that's a big trend, very negative. what is monetary policy causing money printing cause for the ultimate value of the currency? It reduces the purchasing power of the currency. It makes the currency less valuable, debases the currency. That's fundamentally what happens. You have a balloon, you expand the size of the balloon, eventually it's going to pop. This is just basic physics. The other very negative trend that we're seeing at a very broad macro level is sloppy value representations in all of equities, public and private equities. Now, what are the causes? What are the fundamental causes for that? Very similar to monetary policy, monetary inflation, right? You have a tiny group of people. Instead of the FOMC or the board of the central banks, it's in the context of companies, it's called the board of directors, right? The board decides arbitrarily, oh, we're going to go raise more capital, or we're going to issue more shares, or we're going to buy a company, whatever the events are, right? Let's print more of the shares. So instead of 1,000 shares that only exist, like the finite number of shares where we represent the value of the company, guess what? Now there's 2,000 shares. What if you invested and you bought 100 shares of the company, you bought 10% of the company when they only had 1,000 shares, but then the company printed another 1,000 shares and they didn't give you an opportunity to invest? Guess what? You no longer own 10% of the company. You own 5% of the company. You got diluted by 50%, 50. By the way, this is not uncommon. It doesn't happen in that simplistic of an example I gave, but the fundamental effect is very common, and the net result is very common as well. Often you get diluted by 50, 60. Sometimes over the life of a company's kind of history, you get diluted 70, 80, 90%. There are examples I've learned about. I haven't personally experienced them. That would be really horrific if I ever did. Maybe I will one day. But some companies that dilute their shareholders by 95%.
Oh, I've seen that many times. And I've been a part of that many times, unfortunately.
That's absolutely horrible. Okay, so that's the other trend, right? Monetary policy causing the devaluation of fiat currencies, all of them, and board policies causing the deflation, right, and debasement of equities. Now, what is the answer to the first problem? Monetary policies being really crazy. Obviously, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the answer. Full stop, period. There are no other solutions. Bitcoin is the answer. Okay? So huge shift. That's why I'd say Bitcoin, and I agree with Michael Saylor after really thinking about this for quite a while, and not as long as Michael, but actually maybe half as long as Michael, because Michael's really only been going hard on Bitcoin for 5 or 6 years. Not many people realize this. I would say Bitcoin will definitely at some point in the next 10, 20 years be worth, 15 to $20 million in dollar terms per Bitcoin, right? We need an answer to the second problem, which, as we've discussed in the show in the past, the market opportunity for equity, for value representation of capitalism in terms of companies and startups and business, the market opportunity for that is 2 to 3 times the size of all money, of all fiat currencies. All fiat currencies combined, you combine them all, it's like $200 trillion.
Correct.
All companies, if you combine it all, is $700 to $800 trillion.
And if you throw in financial assets on top of that, like real estate, derivatives, options, you're getting into
probably
the
quadrillion.
About $1.5 quadrillion. And that's just an estimate.
Absolutely. $1 to $2 quadrillion. And so I think definitely the big shift we're going to see, and many people have been saying this, but again, the methods in which they're using are all perverted. They're using the same fundamental methods that fiat has suffered from, which is centralized entities dictating supply arbitrarily. Centralized entities, central banks, federal banks, dictating supply arbitrarily and creating ground rules. When you create an Ethereum blockchain and you raise venture capital and you do a pre-mine, you are a central bank. You are not giving your users the freedoms, the permissionlessness, and the fair access to that asset that they can have. Furthermore, if your issuance schedule does not essentially mirror Bitcoin, you are delivering another inflationary asset. And again, the feature of value destruction over time is inflation. And so unless you can prove that your asset is fundamentally programmatically deflationary at a mechanistic level, you're just repeating the same cycle that we've seen in the last several decades with fiat currencies.
And added to that, truly without centralized control. So in these VC-funded blockchains, there's centralized control. The VCs, the founders, and so on. And we've seen examples where, okay, XRP, the founders maybe, I don't know, there was some issue, they issued tokens to themselves. Or Curve Finance, the founder had so much, I don't know the exact story, so forgive me if I'm wrong, the founder had so much loans taken on Curve that when he was liquidated, it caused problems for all Curve holders. So Tao, of course, is completely decentralized, or as much as you can be, and there's no such issue. So, but, this issue of equity versus alpha tokens in Bittensor, this is where in the first few episodes that we did, I had so much internal anguish. I was trying to figure this out. Why own alpha tokens instead of equity? And it was literally in the middle of one of our episodes, you kind of opened my mind to the value of the alpha tokens, where if the subnet owner really understands the philosophy of Bittensor, there is that if, they can make the alpha tokens much more valuable than any sort of equity ownership could possibly be. And I think Shaquille and Ridges is the perfect example of that. But really, so many of the subnets, I want to say at least half the subnets, I think more and more of the subnets are getting it. Not all of the subnets get it, just like not all public companies realize how they need to treat their shareholders. I think a lot of the subnets are starting to understand, hey, we really need to focus on our alpha tokens, not our equity issuance. Those are the ones, as an investor, those are the ones you focus in on as an investor. Again, not every subnet is a great investment, but some really are. And the more the subnet owner has good ideas plus strong incentives to get their alpha tokens valued correctly, then the alpha is much more valuable than the equity. And you've opened my eyes to that, and that really philosophically flipped me in a very deep way into Bittensor. Even though I was already all in and then some into Bittensor, I was having this internal battle, mostly because I was talking to people on Wall Street and trying to explain to them, and they would all bring up I have contractual control over equity. And then you realize the difference between dumb contracts and smart contracts, and you realize the value of a good leader is what makes something valuable. A good leader in a subnet, what makes the alpha valuable. So, but again, you bring up so many good points. I want to add, every week I see what's been great for me, my experience in Tao and Bittensor is every week I'm starting to see more catalysts for why Bittensor should go up than I saw the week before. And usually they're in conjunction with the things we discuss in these episodes, like my mind-opening moment of where I understood truly philosophically what alpha tokens were all about and so on. But now on a very technical level, I'm seeing catalysts that are unstoppable. So for instance, it's very hard for the average person to buy a subnet token, which in a sense is a way of investing in these subnets. And again, we've just said the subnets could be, if you use the arbitrage, some subnets are worth 100 million where their centralized counterparts are worth billions. There's going to be an arbitrage. You should buy the subnets. And so, but it's hard to buy subnets sometimes. And what I'm seeing now, though, is just in the past couple of weeks, it's getting easier to own subnet tokens. And by the way, a fundamental part of Bittensor is you have to buy a Tao token to use the Tao token to buy a subnet token. You cannot avoid that step, from what I understand. And so what I'm seeing is just a very technical direct catalyst. You start to see stuff like Yuma Asset Management's index funds into subnets. So now finally institutions can buy in a sort of clean way subnets. Some pension fund, the California Teachers Fund, is not just going to get a Talisman wallet and buy subnet tokens, but they will invest in index funds like what Yuma is providing to buy subnet tokens. Mentat Mines also providing index funds to buy subnets. But now you also see, people are building bridges between centralized exchanges to buy subnet tokens. So Hippias, I don't know who did the bridge, but Hippias and the centralized exchange MEXC, again, not the most popular centralized exchange, but MEXC allows you to directly buy Hippias. Now, when you buy Hippias, behind the scenes, you don't see it. MEXC is buying Tao and then using it to buy the subnet token. So this is all increasing. And by the way, there are people working on bridges from every centralized exchange and every blockchain into the subnet tokens. So you're going to, as these things roll out, which they will, because I've talked to just in the past week, 3 different people working on this. As you see this happen, and look, I'm recommending in my subscription service, as of today, we're starting to recommend subnets directly. So as you see more interest in the subnets, as you see the subnets hit the news, like I'm sure Ridges will once they release their competitive product to Cursor, you're going to increase demand from from investors into the subnets. You're going to increase the need and the development of bridges from these centralized exchange into the subnets. And that's all going to increase the buying pressure on Tao. At the exact same time, by the way, the Tao halvening happens, which is going to reduce the supply for sale every day of Tao tokens. So I hate to talk about prices too. This is not about shilling Tao. I don't think we need to do that. That's going to do it on its own. But I can easily see a Tao price in the thousands, even by the end of the year, if not soon after, because of all these forces coming into play.
I totally agree with you, James. Shout out to the team at Latent Holdings, which is the lab that I'm building with the core maintainer of Bittensor. We released our own kind of contribution to liquidity bridging. As you mentioned, this is obviously a big thing that the ecosystem's seeing a lot of activity around.
I had no idea. What bridges are you working on?
Well, we released something called VTAO. It's called Virtual Tao. And what it is it's fully open source and audited by a third-party auditing firm, which is very respected in crypto called Celic. And it runs on layer 0, which supports every blockchain out there, every cryptocurrency bridging mechanism. And what you do is you basically provide your Tao, you stake it permissionlessly into this VTAO contract, and you're then able to basically access liquidity pools across any of these other cryptocurrencies on Solana. I think we're actually releasing Solana support this week. Any EVM chain, so Avalanche, Arbitrum, any Ethereum network. And you can basically start to see, I think what we expect to see are liquidity pools that expand the liquidity of these alpha tokens across all these other blockchains. And again, Tao denominated, right? You still have to go through Tao and support the liquidity via Tao funding fundamentally. But what it's just providing is better interop and better extensibility across the entire crypto ecosystem. Because the reality is there is a huge amount of liquidity in the Ethereum ecosystem, in the Solana ecosystem, in these other networks. And the easier, to your point, the easier we make it for people to access their own funding sources, their own liquidity sources, the faster and more rapidly we're going to see liquidity go into these alpha tokens.
So like, for instance, using your bridges, can I be on Uniswap? I have USDC and there could be a pool USDC right into a subnet?
Yes, you could do this today very easily. Yep.
Wow. So that, by the way, that right there is an enormous catalyst for Tao, because, and just like it was a catalyst for Bitcoin, the more exchanges there were for Bitcoin back in 2012, 2013, through the more liquidity, the higher Bitcoin went. The same thing's going to happen for Tao. The same thing's going to happen. The subnet prices have been kind of trending down over the past, since DTES, since the past few months, because it's been hard to buy them. But meanwhile, the value of all these subnets have been going up in terms of the quality of their products and so on. So this is an enormous catalyst for Tao. I don't think people realize how enormous this is. We're talking about going from billions in liquidity to trillions in liquidity for these subnet tokens. And that means, again, buying Tao exactly when the supply for sale every day of Tao tokens is going down.
Yeah, I think there's a 7-to-1 or a 5-to-1 ratio of daily volume, trading volume, vis-a-vis Tao itself across all the exchanges, Coinbase, Binance, et cetera, and alpha tokens on Bittensor, right? So there's about $500 to $600 million per day of Tao trading volume. And so it's a lot of liquidity there, very deep. And if you wanted to spot buy on Binance or Coinbase or something, $5 million worth of Tao or $10 million worth of Tao, you could do that in a day without moving the price. It's pretty crazy, right? If you went and bought 50 million worth of Tao, yeah, it's probably going to move the price up by, 10, 20% or something, which by the way, that's kind of what we've been seeing in the last few days is, people buying, 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million worth of Tao in a very short period of time. On the alpha token side, the reason the daily volume across all the alpha tokens is 75 to 100 million a day is we don't have the circulating supply available for the trading volume to actually come and match the level of Tao itself. And so something that I think is also going to be a big catalyst for price discovery, for a lot more liquidity, and sort of just better pricing all of these subnets is, I'd say probably in about 6 months or maybe 9 months, we're going to see enough circulating alpha tokens per subnet, which are 21 million supply constrained. They go through their own emission schedules and their own halvings. We're going to see enough circulating depth, I think, to see an equilibrium between the daily trading volume of alpha tokens and the daily trading volume of Tao. And once they're both about, by then Tao is probably going to be at 1 billion or 2 billion a day. Once all the alpha tokens are similarly at, 1 billion, 2 billion a day, that's when I think we're really going to start to see really accurate price discovery of, let's say, maybe the top 10 or 20 alpha tokens, subnets. And then you're going to be able to see like, wow, maybe the top 10 or so subnets will be worth, billion or so each, as opposed to, 100 million or so each today. That's really where we're going to start to see more accurate pricing vis-a-vis startups. Because even today, the top 5 subnets, if you valued them as startups, like VC-funded startups, they'd be worth many high hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars each today in terms of the utility and the value that they're producing by the miners. And so I totally agree. There's a lot of catalysts. There's a lot of exciting things. I would just encourage everyone, do your own research. None of this is financial advice from James and I. We are analyzing everything from our perspective and kind of how we see things, but we really expect Bittensor, obviously, to grow massively. And there's really a lot of exciting things to talk about beyond price.
I think what's been really interesting to me is not, because look, we've had these podcasts when the Bittensor price was going straight down, and it is what it is sometimes. It's a volatile, just like all crypto is volatile. But philosophically, again, I love the fact that every time I look a little deeper into Tao and Bittensor, and there's always layers to uncover, I realize how pure an example this is of what is a free market, how much the ideas and philosophy of a free market are instilled into Tao. And by the way, it's helped me to realize how important the philosophy of a free market is. Like just like we were talking about permission versus permissionless, like this simple concept of permission in many categories is what's keeping so many people in poverty and despair. Because if you need permission to do something, you often have to pay for that permission in one way or the other, either with your time or your resources or your money or whatever. I mean, money is just energy. It's just a way to convert ideas and assets into other ideas and assets that help you to live better. And the more permission you need, the more restrictions on your money, the less ability you have to convert ideas into real assets. And that's kind of the beauty of this. By the way, that's the beauty of all of crypto, but Bittensor really encapsulated it in the best way. Whereas Ethereum is encapsulated in the DeFi space, and Bitcoin encapsulates it in philosophical view of what money should really be. By the way, I think now Bitcoin was just created to show us how to create Bittensor, is my view of Bitcoin. Bittensor is just Bitcoin with the incentive mechanism abstracted so that everybody could buy their little fiefdom called a subnet within Bittensor so they can define their own incentive mechanism, their own ways. And then the rest of it is all like Bitcoin. So it's the same thing other than the incentive mechanism.
This was an awesome episode, James. Congratulations on reaching 10. Hopefully we can do hundreds more in the future. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, happy Halloween and happy Satoshi White Paper Day. I did not know that. I'm going to have to, what was it, page 4, section 6?
Section 6, yes.
All right, I'm going to read that, and I will see you next week, JJ.
See you soon, James. Take care.